credit ratings even deeper into complete and utter junk status days after President Akufo-Addo used a UN platform to take on the world's credit ratings agencies.
Credit rating agencies have been quick to downgrade economies in Africa, making it harder to service our debts.
We have the latest on this credit ratings downgrade by Fitch, just announced a few hours back. Plus, Ghana's strong position against Russia's war on Ukraine, raising eyebrows across the world. We'll hear from our Foreign Affairs Minister with some analysis. Top Story is always brought to you by Vodafone. Ghana's economy has tonight been battered once more. Another downgrade, pushing the country's credit rating even deeper into complete and utter junk status. Already we're in a junk status. It's even more junk tonight. Days after President Akufo-Addo used a UN platform to take on the world's credit ratings agencies.
Credit rating agencies have been quick to downgrade economies in Africa, making it harder to service our debts. The tag of Africa as an investment risk is little more than in substance a self-fulfilling prophecy created by the prejudice of the international money market, which denies us access to cheaper borrowing, pushing us deeper into debts. During times of crisis, the facade of international cooperation under which they purport to operate disappears. We do not have the luxury of being able to pick and choose which problem to solve. None of them can wait. The economic turbulence requires urgent and immediate solution.
So that is the president just a couple of days back at the United Nations General Assembly speaking about the downgrades and how difficult it has made it for many African countries to access credit that can be serviced reasonably well tonight. Just as we've been speaking the last couple of hours, Fitch has downgraded Ghana's credit ratings again. And the downgrade is now on focusing on Ghana's long-term local and foreign currency issue default ratings to CC from what it used to be triple C. We used to be triple C. We are now double C. Fitch typically says it does not assign outlooks to issuers with ratings of triple C or below. And they are now giving us reasons for that. We'll get into what this means for us pretty shortly. We'll be talking to Professor Bokping, economist, on this. But just for you to appreciate it, triple C was bad enough as in junk status. But this is a further reduction of what we already had. It means we are further down the junk. If you were first level of junk, you're now a second level of junk. Until the C disappear, then you possibly your credit is worth nothing, possibly moving into the negative. That's where we're heading towards at this rate. My colleague Kojo Brace joins me in the studio with more on this because Fitch has given us a breakdown of their reasons. They said they normally wouldn't do this for triple C ratings because you're junk. We don't even need to explain, but they will do in our case. So Brace, what is the basis for this?
So the basis is on the increased probability of a debt restructuring. We were talking about this restructuring here some time ago. Now, they believe that the downgrade reflects the increased likelihood that Ghana will pursue a debt restructuring, giving mounting finance stress with surging interest cost on domestic debt and a prolonged lack of access to Eurobond market. There is a high likelihood that the IMF support program currently being negotiated will require some form of debt treatment due to the climbing interest cost and structurally low revenue as a percentage of GDP. Now, they believe that this will be in the form of a debt exchange and will qualify as a distressed debt exchange under our criteria. The government has not confirmed or denied press reports that Ghana is preparing to negotiate a restructuring. They also say that interest costs on external debt are lower than for domestic debt, and near-term external debt amortizations appear manageable. However, they believe there could be an incentive to spread a debt restructuring burden across domestic and external creditors, and therefore do not have a strong basis to differentiate between foreign and local currency ratings at this time.
And the thing I find instructive in this is that the government has not confirmed or denied press reports that Ghana is preparing to negotiate a restructuring. And this is just on the back of the Bloomberg report yesterday that was very categorical that government was preparing to restructure domestic bonds.
Sure.
And many had suggested that indeed if government had no intention to do so, they should have been forthright about it, calm the investor community.
Exactly.
And Fitch is pointing to government's failure to come out to clarify the situation as a basis to go ahead and further downgrade us. It is almost suggesting, well, if you're silent,
then we will go ahead.
Then there must be some truth.
Okay,
in Bloomberg's report yesterday and others making the rounds that you indeed intend to restructure the debt, and restructuring is technically a default. Kojo, it also appears that our debt servicing costs also is a factor in this.
Yeah, it's captured in the report under the high debt service financing constraint topic there. They according to them, interest costs reached 47.5% of revenue in 2021 and 54% in the first quarter of 2022. Interest payment on domestic debt comprise around 75% of total interest cost. This reflects high yields on domestic debt, which have climbed following a 34% year-on-year spike in inflation as at August 2022, and monetary tightening, with the Bank of Ghana hiking its policy rate to 22% from 14.5% in February. Now, yield on 91-day Treasury bill reached 27.0% in August, up from 12.5% in August 2021. And the 10-year yields have spiked to about 35% in September from around 20% in first quarter 2022 alone.
Okay, I see. This is a very interesting point. It means that it's becoming, and that's what the president was saying, it's becoming more costly to borrow now for the government.
Yes.
And that's what they're showing. The interests are it's simply skyrocketing there. We also know Ghana is currently locked out of the Eurobond market. And it appears this is also an important factor in this latest downgrade.
Sure. Now, Fitch says they expect external financing access to stay limited until at least an IMF program is agreed, as Ghana is likely to remain locked out of the Eurobond market, which had been the country's regular source of external financing. They also say that the government obtained a 750 million USD from Africa Export and Import Bank, and that's something that occurred some few weeks ago, and also some 250 million US dollars syndicated loan from global commercial banks. It can also use its sinking fund, and they estimate that Ghana faces around 3 billion US dollars of external debt service cost in 2023, including amortization and interest. Now, they say that there is one deadly indicator. Those are the things that they are looking at there.
So you look at this and it tells you the burden that we have to carry. I mean, if they're talking about 3 billion of external debt service costs, that is what we are asking from the IMF loan. I mean, so if the IMF money comes in 3 billion, that alone in one go can wipe out what you're suggesting there. That indicator which most countries dread, and we saw this play out in Sri Lanka, the external reserve position, as one is one that governments, the Bank of Ghana, central banks watch very, very closely, because once it diminishes into a certain territory, then you are facing the apocalyptic scenario. That is also a key factor here, isn't it?
Yes. So like
the external reserve position.
Like the downgrading of the economy, Fed says they expect persistent downward reserve pressure in the absence of an IMF program. Officials' reserve asset fell to 7.3 billion USD in June from 9.8 billion USD in 2021, and gross international reserves, excluding oil funds and encumbered assets, totaled 7.1 billion USD in March. The latest figure available says the exchange rate has weakened by 40% year to date against the US dollar, reaching 10 cedis to a dollar in September, potentially made worse by the drop in non-resident investment in local currency debt. Non-resident holdings were some 23.1 billion cedis as at end August, or 4% of Fitch forecast 2022 GDP.
Okay, so our reserve currently is 7.1 billion. The question is, how many months of import cover will that be? I mean, and the key question, the reason why that is an important question is then you can determine this is how we get to import stuff into this country. The fuel that you put in your car, we use dollars to purchase that. If your foreign reserve is that low, then you get to struggle to bring in stuff like fuel. That happened in Sri Lanka. They ran out of, the foreign reserve got depleted. They could not import essential commodities into the country anymore. Then we had long lines, fuel shortages, etc., hitting them. That's why Fitch is saying where we are right now, we're in dangerous territory. We need to be watching that. What about the pending IMF program? Did that feature at all?
It did. Now, it says government reversed its long-standing position against seeking an IMF support.
We know
July
there's a huge U-turn that they did,
that will never go, but then they had to go. And Fitch says it believes that a deal with the IMF is likely within the next 6 months. I remember at the beginning of this whole negotiation with the IMF, the 6 month was bandied around, but we thought it was going to be before the end of the year. But Fitch says they believe it would happen the next 6 months. Ghana has indicated it could request to 3 billion USD, and the program could unlock budget support from other official lenders. However, Fitch says it believes a restructuring will be deemed necessary with local currency debt treatment potentially included prior to an IMF approval, as the IMF is unable to provide financing where it accesses a country's debt to be unsustainable. Now, so that is what is there. It says that the most recent IMF debt sustainability analysis conducted in 2021 found Ghana at a high risk of debt distress and vulnerable to shocks to market access and high debt servicing cost. Interest costs have also risen substantially since then, Evans.
Okay, I want us to also look at this issue of Ghana's ability to raise enough revenue. I mean, that is key. If we were raising enough revenue, our problem won't be this deep.
Yes.
But that's an issue too, why they've downgraded us again.
Because they say they expect high interest cost and low revenue to impede fiscal consolidation. Now, the medium-term fiscal framework in the 2022 budget envisaged narrowing the deficit to below the 5% of GDP ceiling by 2024, based on the expiry of pandemic-related expenditure and higher domestic revenue, driven by new taxes, including an electronic transaction levy. So, e-levy featured there. However, implementation delays led to lower revenue and a larger nominal deficit in first quarter 2022 relative to budget forecast. The government's slim majority in parliament could frustrate attempt to raise tax rate or implement new taxes. So they made reference to how far or how much we've been able to raise from e-levy, and to say that that has also constrained government's ambition or government's intention to raise revenue, and that's why they perceive that we will still have challenges in that regard.
Kojo, thank you very much. I want to break this down a bit more. So what does this mean for you? What does it mean in real terms, and how does it hit your pocket? I want to bring in Professor Godfred Bokping. Prof, thanks for your time here on Top Story.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, and good evening to our cherished listeners.
So we were triple C, now we are double C. I mean, if you read the detailed analysis that the Fitch is putting up to back this further downgrade, it makes for some head-splitting reading. It almost sounds apocalyptic. Is it that bad, and what does that mean to be downgraded from triple C to double C?
Well, this is coming at a very challenging time for the government, but there's no surprise in their downgrade. It had been expected. It's well anchored. When I say so, it's because if you look at the last Fitch rating before this one, when they downgraded us to triple C, and to date, there hasn't been any real predictable measures that the government has announced, except that they are engaging or developing their programs to be presented to the fund. The conclusion, there's a general consensus now, even from the IMF, the World Bank, including the rating agencies, that a certain level of debt restructuring is unavoidable. Now, you can see already how investors are pricing that in the spread with our Euro bonds, which is trading in excess of 2,000 basis points above U.S. Treasury yields. Again, you can look at that with relative to the average spread for Africa. So what you see from the bond spread is that investors are not treating Africa or the continent as a homogeneous continent. They are applying some level of differences, which is reflecting in the differences in terms of the spread. Because the average spread for African Eurobonds largely has been trending below 900 basis points. Now, so that is already known and that is highly expected. So it's just saying that we are much in a deeper junk territory than we were during their last rating. And what it tells you also now is that default is a strong probability, right? So when it happens that way, typically investors will shy away from any security issue. It's much more serious for us because this is not only government long-term foreign debt issue, but they're also attacking the domestic long-term issue. Now, within the domestic market, typically the government security is the safest in the market. So, and that is why it's a bit troubling, because in the event that everything else goes bad, people want to run to government security as a safe haven, sort of. And that is what it is now in a junk territory, in a deep junk territory. Now, I assume even for banks, financial institutions that have positions in government securities, this would affect them because under the risk-based capital prescription, once your exposure increases, then it means that your capital cover would have to be increased in one way or you decide to sell down on your portfolio. So this is real. But typically, because, if you look at government approach and posture, I think that hasn't helped. Because unlike the monetary policy side, the central bank with their regular meetings and update and all of that, but the long silence from the fiscal side hasn't helped. But of course, my expectation is that it's not as though government is not doing anything. Of course, they are working on their program to be presented to the fund. I'm sure in the next couple of weeks, as the negotiation begins and more information is out there, it will moderate this. But keep this in mind, that when you are downgraded to that level, you've been priced out of the international market. It's harder to regain and improve your credit rating significantly to re-enter the international capital market.
I guess the big question then becomes where we are right now with the double C. Yes. Can an IMF program even save us?
It will take a while. As we have said, one thing that the government can do is that it requires more than an economic program now, because the IMF program is limited in scope in terms of all that the country needs to do in order to sustainably and inclusively come out of this crisis. So some kind of governance reforms, which will also require another look at the way we are operationalizing our democracy, that would also require us looking at our constitution, the necessary revisions that we need to do. I think we need to pursue them concurrently in a way that offers greater hope and confidence in the economy. Because the reason I'm saying so is that we cannot expect an IMF program to do the governance and the productivity enhancing reforms, even including revisions to our constitution. No, we have to take that bold decision alongside and do that. Why I'm saying so is that from the beginning of the year, we have been quite clear that government needs to do something about the size of government. If that had been done, it's a bit easier if when government's own internal austerity or haircut is done and is known in asking creditors to also come on board also. But there is no indication from the side of government that we are all on the same page of how deep this crisis is. And it's as though it's business as usual. And I think that is not good enough.
Prof, thank you very much for your thoughts on this pretty gloomy day for our economy. If it was gloomy already, just got gloomier with this latest announcement by Fitch. We were triple C, further downgrade to a double C. We were junk already. This is deeper into the junk status than we already were. Well, another big story we're watching for you tonight. Ghana today has been flexing its muscle on the international stage. Guess what? Taking on the almighty Russia. Yes, Russia on the international stage. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Shirley Yokobotre, of course, is part of Ghana's contingent traveling to the United Nations this week, and she's been addressing the world today and has been declaring Ghana's position on the decision by Russia to invade Ukraine, and she's not been holding back, pulling no punches, mincing no words at all in describing and condemning what Russia is doing in Ukraine as completely unacceptable. In fact, to the extent where she's been calling for Russia to be sanctioned and dragged before the International Criminal Court.
Ghana does not and will not recognize any territory that is unilaterally and forcefully required or acquired as dismembered from a sovereign entity. We reiterate the call on the Russian Federation to immediately and unconditionally cease its operations, withdraw its troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, and respect its neighbors' sovereignty and political independence. The need for a credible pathway for a genuine diplomatic process is urgent. The barrel of the gun does not provide such a pathway. It only leads to needless loss of lives and destruction on both sides. Indeed, the cost of the war have been high, not only for the parties, but also for the rest of the world. As the President of Ghana said yesterday in his statement at the General Assembly, I quote, "Every bullet, every bomb, every shell that hits a target in Ukraine hits our pockets and our economies in Africa," unquote. We already note some positive impacts from the Black Sea Grain Initiative and urge the continuous and unrestricted shipment of grains to countries facing food insecurity. We encourage all stakeholders to reach an early agreement for the export of Russian fertilizers and crop products, especially needed for agrarian-dependent economies. With the rising death toll, civilian casualties, and growing reports of war crimes and other human rights violations, we must uphold our responsibility as a council and send a clear message that perpetrators of atrocities would be held to account. The suffering in Ukraine is abhorrent and should not be dismissed as the mere consequence of war. To do so, we would be endorsing the atrocities and sanctioning impunity. In this regard, we underscore the importance of ensuring accountability for all war crimes committed in Ukraine. Accountability is fundamental to preventing impunity. We must affirm our determination that the litany of atrocious acts that have taken place in Ukraine would be submitted to thorough, transparent, and independent investigations to establish the facts and for the attribution of international crimes to their perpetrators. Ghana remains supportive of international accountability measures, including the various investigative processes being undertaken by the ICC and the Human Rights Council.
Let's get some quick reactions to what you just heard there. Ghana, of course, all guns blazing on the international stage, as you heard from the Foreign Affairs Minister. Samuel Kudicha Blakwa is the shadow foreign minister. If you're in the UK, he's our spokesperson, the minority spokesperson on foreign affairs. Joins us on the telephone line right now. Mr. Kudicha Blakwa, what do you say to that?
Hi, good evening, Evans. To be honest, Evans, and really candid with you, I would have thought that Ghana's foreign minister will be more nuanced and more tactical in her approach. Look, it's not a straightforward matter as just condemning Russia and declaring that you will not recognize any annexed territory in Ukraine. You must bear in mind that anytime you go after Russia, even as members of the Security Council, the 50-member Security Council, within the Security Council, check the voting pattern. China has consistently either abstained or been tilted in the direction of China, in the direction of Russia, pardon me. Then, within the non-permanent members, take the recent vote on the membership of Russia in the Human Rights Council. You have as many as 58 countries generally at the UN General Assembly vote abstaining. 24 voted against. Only 93 said that Russia should be removed from the UN Security Council or should be suspended. Within the Security Council, you have countries like Mexico, countries like Gabon, who are abstaining and who are staying away from this matter in a more frontal and, if you like, a decisive role. So, looking at the nuances and the African Union's own position, if you follow the African Union's posture, the African Union has been quite, neutral. And President Macky Sall has said that the AU want to position itself as a mediator, as Israel, sought to do, in the early stages. And Israel, for example, still positions itself as a mediator. So it's not just about going for Russia, but there's so many countries in the mix. UAE, you have India, you have China, you have Belarus, you have Brazil, you have Mexico, Malaysia. Quite some important countries who, analysts say, appear to have some sympathies for Russia. So, looking at our history as a non-aligned country, the pioneers of the non-aligned movement, one would have expected some more nuancing and some more, if you like, strategic consultations behind the scene before putting out this frontal position. And I must also emphasize, Evans, that our foreign ministry should engage the Ghanaian populace more on such an important matter, crucial matter. There hasn't been a debate in Parliament. Parliament is the house of the people. The people's representatives are in Parliament. We've not had a debate on this matter to crystallize a Ghanaian position. And there was really no rush to say that, as Russia engages in this partial mobilization and seeking to, hold those referenda and to annex those Donbass territories, Ghana will not recognize. What really is a rush? What are we trying to achieve? And have we really considered the geopolitical fallout and the many countries that we risk, if you like, losing that leverage, where we could have positioned ourselves as a UN Security Council member country to really be seen as neutral arbiters. Because what we need is an end to this conflict. And more countries should be part of the solution rather than taking a posture that, if you like, will escalate matters. So I think that the foreign minister really has rushed. I don't think that this position is very well considered. And let's encourage a Ghanaian position. Let's be more democratic, more consultative. There should be a parliamentary debate on these
on this very matter. Someone could have very fascinating insights on this very issue. I mean, Ghana is about to play another international country, Brazil. So we're going to go there pretty shortly. Thank you. I'm grateful that you joined us. But I want to give a quick word to Dr. Ishmael Holova, who is international relations expert with the University of Education, Winneba, who joins us. Doc, where do you stand on this?
Thank you very much. Good evening to you and the listeners. I'm tempted to believe that the minister didn't actually add in what he said. Of course, looking at the issues at play and Ghana's long-held position, it is rather consistent with what we have done over the years. Indeed, when the nation Ghana was born during the Cold War, we have taken that position to be positively neutral. But that does not mean that we will not take our stand or position on issues that are of relevance to us in the international arena. What we seek to do throughout our stay as an independent state is to have that position that reflects what our leaders are thinking at any point in time without any influence from any quarters. Now, I'm tempted to believe that the minister expressed this view in connection with what the president has said. So it's in the same line of reasoning that the two of them are speaking the same mind, that Ghana's position is that we are not going to accept a situation where the international boundaries are being withdrawn unilaterally. Now, that is very important because as a nation, we have been at the forefront of the anti-colonial struggle. And this development, as it were, may virtually send the clock back where powerful nations virtually withdraw the maps at their own will. Now, again, it is very important to understand that positive neutrality, which virtually amounts to non-alignment, does not mean that you cannot at any point stick out and say that this country is going contrary to established norms of international behavior. What is at play here is a country that thinks that its interest is threatened and therefore disregard international law. Now, if you come back to our own context within the West African sub-region, we have various issues of territorial claims. Are we going to say that if any country takes arms and invade another country because we have strong relations with that country, we will not make our position of ensuring that the sovereignty of each one of us is maintained? We are not going to be heard on it.
I mean, that's such a fundamental question, Doc, on this subject. And as we move on and begin to appreciate what the ramifications of this really macho approach is, I guess we'll return and expand on this a bit more. But I'm really grateful Dr. Ishmael Hlobo is international relations expert with the University of Education, Winneba, joining us with his thoughts on this very, very interesting subject with Ghana taking on Russia on the international stage. Listen, right after these two quick commercials, the next voice you hear belongs to Gary Al Smith. And once I say that, you know what's coming up. Brazil is in the lion's den. They will be eaten alive by the blacks.